Well, do you remember the story in Puccini's opera Madame Butterfly, where a Japanese geisha in the late 1800s enters into a marriage contract with a lieutenant in the United States Navy, has his child, and she waits for him to return, and then when he finally returns, he brings his American wife, and she's distraught, takes her life. Did you ever wonder what happened to this child? Well, Angela Davis-Garner, in her new book, Butterfly's Child, tells that child's story. And we'll learn more about the story and the book when she is our guest on North Carolina Bookwatch next.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Welcome to North Carolina Bookwatch. I'm D.G. Martin, and my guest is Angela Davis-Garner. She's the author of Butterfly's Child. Welcome, Angela Davis-Garner. We're so happy to have you back.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
We enjoyed visiting with you about your book, Plum Wine, which was set in Japan with a North Carolina woman.
Right.
And looked forward to your new book, but didn't know that you would stick with the Japanese themes.
Right. Well, I didn't either exactly, but I was at a production of the opera Madame Butterfly, and at the end of it, my friend turned to me and said, "Wonder whatever happened to Butterfly's Child." I thought, oh, that's it.
Did you really?
Yeah,
Just like that?
Just like that. It was just a seed that grew. Because I was already caught up in Japan. I knew a lot about Japanese culture, very interested in it. And the story just appealed to me because I knew he would be a lonely child in a difficult family, and that's my material. I write about that in book after book, even though it may not look
about
like
lonely
it.
children in difficult families.
Right, that's my subject matter. Everybody has a sort of a magma that they write from, some wound or something. Anyway, that's what I write from, so I was immediately drawn to that.
Well, did you, how did it take off from there with the idea? And it's, you get these ideas, I'm sure often that you get ideas that are kind of brilliant. Well, why don't we do this? And then as you write it, it doesn't work out.
Right.
Did you know immediately that you could make a story out of this and didn't get discouraged at any point along the way?
Oh, I did get discouraged here and there, sure. The place where I realized it was going to work was when I got Benji's voice. That's what I named the son. And I wondered how he would feel being all alone in America. I made him 5 years old with people he didn't know and not knowing the language, separated from his mother who had just killed herself right in front of his eyes. I started writing, and it took me a long time to get his voice, but once I did, and he's thinking about the Kappa world, which is a mischievous character he feels that those people have brought him here, and imagining farm life from his point of view, I knew I had it.
So what you did is you imagine this child of Lieutenant Pinkerton and Butterfly, named him Benji, and that name comes, where did that name come from?
Well, in the opera he's called Sorrow, or Trouble, depending on which translation it is, but I named him after his father, Lieutenant Benjamin Franklin Pinkerton.
So he's Benjamin.
Right.
And called Benji, which could be an Oriental name, sort of. And he is brought back to America by Pinkerton, by Lieutenant, who feels an obligation. Now, that's a stretch, isn't it? Most American service, or many American servicemen, and Pinkerton was willing to walk away from this relationship. How did you develop in him the responsibility that he felt to bring the child back?
Well, that's a great question, and that was the hardest part, really, was to figure out the motivations of Pinkerton. Why would he want to bring his child, take his child? And his wife was even harder, First of all, why would she have gone to Japan with him? That was not a smart idea. And why would she be willing to bring the child of her mistress into her home? So I figured out those motivations, which took me some time.
Well, you did construct a major character from the one in the opera who was just a toss-away, which is the American wife of Lieutenant Pinkerton.
Yes.
She becomes a major. Would you tell us, this is Kate, and would you tell us a little bit about her?
Yes, in the opera she just has a brief appearance at the end. You know, here's the American wife. So I knew nothing about her. In fact, I made up all the characters on my own. But she, in my imagination, was from a sophisticated town at the time in Galena, Illinois. And she's taken to live on a farm. She knows nothing about farming. And they've had a good marriage up until now, but she now knows about Butterfly, Cho-Cho-san, and this offspring of her butterflies and her husband. So she begins to be tormented by this. She does her best by the child. She really tries to love him and be a good mother to him. She feels sorry for him. He's so lonely and has lost his mother. She's a good Christian woman. That's part of her motivation. But she can't help but think about Butterfly, his mother, throughout.
So,
and she gradually becomes unhinged because of this.
And Butterfly continues to haunt these people. And
yes.
Tell us how she haunts Benji. This is Butterfly's Benji's mother, Japanese mother, and he loves her, but she's been separated from him by the tragedy at the end of that we saw at the end of the opera, and he's distraught. Loves his mother, but she's not there.
Right. He finds a photograph of her and his father together, sewn in a kimono that was in his trunk, and that is his compass throughout the book. He has that. That helps him hold his memory of her and drives him back to Japan to try to find her. And so he doesn't tell anyone that he has this photograph. He knows, first of all, it's supposed to be a secret that he is the child of Pinkerton in this little community. He knows he's not supposed to tell that he's his son.
In other words, that the cover story is that not that the truth, which is that he's Pinkerton's son, but that he's like today, he's an Asian adoptee of an American family.
He's adopted. And this fools most people, but not everyone. The mother-in-law suspects. There's Benji's friend, a veterinarian named Keast, who also realizes what his parentage is. But that's simmering. That secret is simmering.
This is the boiling point, or the heat under the stew that you're cooking for us in this story.
Right.
Well, I'm fascinated by the story and want to talk some more about it. You know, this is North Carolina Bookwatch, and so you're a North Carolinian, so you're obviously a part of this program. But when you look at this, Pinkertons and Kate and are from Illinois. They're from Illinois. Benji and is a Japanese American character, but there is a North Carolina character, and he sells trees.
Yes.
And will you tell us about him and what role and a little bit of the narrative and what role he plays and where he came from?
Okay. Well, as Benji is crossing America,
I should set this up for you a little bit better. But Benji, as a teenager, ultimately can't take it anymore with it explodes, and he runs away.
Yes.
To go back to Japan. He's on his way back to Japan, and he meets this North Carolina tree salesman.
Right. And his name is Digby Moffett. And he just cropped up as I was writing. And I was so relieved because here was a character whose voice I knew immediately because he speaks like a North Carolinian. In fact, I made him a North Carolinian after the fact because I realized, well, he's talking like...
He's not talking like a guy from Illinois or Midwest. He's talking like somebody we know.
Right. So,
well, who is he and what's he like and what does he add to the story?
Well, he's a trickster figure. He's
a con man.
He's a con man, and he befriends Benji and hires him to sell trees. It takes him under his wing. He's going to teach him how to be grown up, and he's going to help him across the country. But as it turns out, he is a con man, and Benji learns a lot from that.
Well, this is, in some respects, it's a growing up novel for Benji,
Yes.
and you have, is it Digby? Digby?
Digby.
Digby.
I named him after my favorite dog.
Oh, all right. And did you have any, I mean, were these an assembly of people that of North Carolina con men and women that you'd met before?
No, he just came. He's made up out of whole cloth.
One of the things that he does is that he introduces, how do I say this on a family show? He introduces Benji, who's a fairly young teenager at this point, to his sexual orientation.
Right.
And where did this come in, and was this a diversion, or is this an important critical part of the book? What happened?
Well, on the way across the country, he takes him into a whorehouse, which is a very, farm rural whorehouse, and so he initiates him into his sexual life, and that's very important for Benji as a growing up man. He learns something about that, and as he matures in this book, he eventually marries and has a happy family life. So this was the beginning of that part of his.
This is
growing
Benji,
up.
the child of Lieutenant Pinkerton and Madame Butterfly, and he's adopted sort of by his father and works on the farm in Illinois. Then he runs away. He's on his way back, thinking he's going to go back, quote, home.
Right.
He is he's a Eurasian child, and has Japanese features but blonde hair. How does this sort of, when people see him, what do they think of? Do they think of him as an American, or as an Indian, or as a
Well, they think different things, because at that time there weren't any Japanese people in the Midwest, but he's labeled as different. And once the kids at school realize he's Japanese, they taunt him for being Japanese. Once he gets to California, he is discriminated against in a violent way. At that period in America, Japanese were being discriminated against. Rocks thrown through windows of their houses, and there was a lot of conflict between Japan and America over immigration, as it happens, because Japanese settlers in California were doing so well in farming particularly, and so they were taking away jobs. So there were laws passed to eventually stop immigration from Japan. So there was a lot of tension during that period.
But Benji comes to San Francisco on his way back to
Right.
trying to, I mean, here's the teenager trying to, you think of a teenager trying to do this today, bum his way across the
Right.
country and then try to get a ride back on a ship to
Yes.
get back to a place that he doesn't even know,
Yeah.
but feels home to. When he gets to San Francisco, in spite of the discrimination, there's a Japanese community there that
Yes.
but his blonde hair gets in the way a little bit.
Right. And up until in the past couple of years, he had been using shoe polish to color his hair black so that he would look purely Japanese. And the man who befriends him in San Francisco introduces him to hair dye. And when I was doing research, I discovered that hair dye had just been invented, Grierson's hair dye. So that was very convenient. So he starts dyeing his hair.
How does he get back to Japan? How does he get back to Japan?
He learns Japanese from his mentor, and the man knows that he wants to go to Japan. He would rather he stay there with him and be his adopted son. But because he's yearning to go there, this man, Matsumoto, helps him go and helps arrange passage for him across the Pacific.
One of the most interesting, fun parts of the book for me is his arrival in Nagasaki and his coming at home. Now, this gets to maybe some of the key parts of the book, but will you tell us a little bit about his arrival in Nagasaki and what he found there and how he overcame some of the challenges that came before him?
Well, first, he's just thrilled to be there. In his home, he kneels and kisses the ground when he arrives. Then he has to find a place to live, and he starts looking for his mother's family. I discovered when I was in Nagasaki a few years ago doing research for this book that there is a particular neighborhood in Nagasaki called Juzenzi, where people of mixed race or mixed marriage lived. They were sort of confined to that area. That was very helpful to me to know. And then I began, so he learns that, and he goes looking for a place to live. He finds a place to live and a job, and he starts looking for his mother's family. And nearby Juzenji is the area.
This is that neighborhood.
That neighborhood, not far from there.
Well, let me interrupt you just
Yes.
a second, because it reminded me that Nagasaki, we think of it in connection with the end of World War II, but this is
Right.
long before that.
Right.
But that Nagasaki had been sort of a window on the world for Japan, and it was a seaport town where there were people from all over the world.
Exactly,
Not
yes.
like much of Japan where
Right.
it's totally Japanese.
Right. It's very cosmopolitan. There had been Dutch settlers there a couple of centuries before, and there were a lot of people from Europe who came for various reasons.
And tourists come.
Tourists.
And so Benji, as an American, American / Japanese, he's well equipped to thrive in
Yes.
a service to tourists.
Exactly.
What does he learn? What does he learn, and how did you know what he had to learn?
Well, since he's fluent in, he speaks English, of course, and so he looks for a job in a Japanese shop as someone who can help the tourists, help the Japanese manager with the tourists, and that's exactly what he does. And his first day on the job, the man who's his boss rows him out to the ships, which are anchored just off shore, and has him go on board and help him sell things to the tourists, souvenirs. On the way out, rowing out, they hold up things. Here's a Japanese nightingale. Here's a Japanese necklace. Don't you want to buy it? And so he's very helpful to this man, Tsuji, I named him. And then back at the shop, he helps him a lot, and then eventually establishes his own store of fine art, which caters to tourists. And
So is that the story? This is the story of the child of Madame Butterfly and Lieutenant Pinkerton. He comes to America, gets Americanized, and then he makes his way back to Japan and becomes successful business-wise, starts his own family, and that's the happy ending. Is that the book?
Well, the other characters also play a big part. I mean, I follow their stories too. What happens to Frank Pinkerton, who's a very troubled man, and his wife Kate, she's got her own story. They're shifting points of view, so I tell those main stories, and also the veterinarian Keast. But I want to say one thing about where this book came from, in part. Since I did grow up in the South and was very interested in and passionate about racial injustice when I was growing up, I realized that I was transferring my feelings about that into this book. Because
How so? This is entirely, we've got an Eurasian child in Illinois encountering racial prejudice in the late 1890s, early 1900s era. How does that translate into North Carolina race relationships, either in the 60s or today's race relations?
Well, discrimination and prejudice is universal. It's happened many places, many times. But I identified with this child who was of mixed race, didn't belong anywhere. The Japanese call him a bat between cultures. And he was discriminated against and stoned in California, just as black people fighting for their rights in the South faced violence. So, and that's what I grew up with.
Well, in Benji's case, he triumphs over, and
Yes.
despite the
Right.
prejudice that he felt in Illinois,
Right.
in San Francisco as a Japanese in an American culture, and then back in Japan as a mixed race person in a society that that celebrates, it's not his diversity, but its
Right,
unity.
right.
And so, what kind of discrimination were you attacking, or were you dealing with in this book?
Well, I was centered in my character, Benji, and just going through living what he lived. But I'm just, in my heart, I'm very interested in racial justice, which he could not find either in America or in Japan. I mean, when he gets to Japan and he finds that he's something of an outsider, I just identified with that.
That this child of mixed race is not going to be an insider anyway. It's funny that a different perspective for me, that, and this happens, I guess, happily sometimes when your reader takes off on a different, in a different direction about this, but my view of this is that Benji triumphs over this and does not let it beat him down.
Oh, exactly.
He just goes right through it and succeeds
Yes.
with his mission, and that the losers are those who are so wrapped up in their own racial identity or racial pride that they do not recognize his talents.
Exactly. I'm so glad you said that. That's the point of the book, is that he changes, he triumphs over his difficulties. You know, difficult family background and so on. He grows, he changes, and that's correct.
Well, I have to say that it's hard to say the best part of your book, but one of the most wonderful parts of your book is the ending. I'm not going to talk about the ending because with great specificity, but it comes to a resolution as he learns about his mother's family and gets situated in that and builds his own life. But we're not finished with Benji at the end. He's a young person, and so he's also living in times of transition in which Japan will go all through everything. So of course the question is, what are you going to do with Benji now? We got another sequel coming?
Maybe, I don't know. I'm certainly interested in that period of time, but I feel mostly finished with Benji. It's open-ended, the book. The reader doesn't know what he will do next, and I like to have a book end that way, for the reader to imagine his next steps.
Your book has gotten great reception. I think people who've read it have enjoyed it, and there is some people, because of the association with opera and with Madame Butterfly, it's enriched the experience of some opera goers for this opera. And when people talk to you as you're out on book tour about the relationship between the opera and the book, what kinds of questions do they ask you? Or comments do they give you?
Well, first of all, I was nervous about writing a story nestled up to that great opera. And I was afraid that opera fans might be offended, because I do play with the opera story.
Excuse me for interrupting, but it's kind of like writing the sequel, the Scarlett O'Hara's sequel, that you take the character beyond what was envisioned. I mean, it's a daunting challenge.
Right. Though I didn't, I mean, it is a sequel, but unlike Gone with the Wind, the opera doesn't have fully developed characters. So I was able to make up my own characters. But I was very gratified when I had a great review recently in Opera News, which is published by the Metropolitan Opera, and it got a rave review. And the reviewer said that people who are not familiar with opera will want to go out and see this opera after they read the book, and that people who are familiar with the opera won't ever see it quite the same way again. So I was thrilled by that.
Yeah, I think that's
and that
high compliment.
And that you don't have to know the opera to read the book.
Well, real quickly.
Yes.
Talk about how did you get interested in Japan? Why is it just covering you up? Two books on Japan. Where'd all that come from?
My first job was teaching in Japan when I was 23 years old. Teaching English in a Japanese women's college, very fine college. And I've been enmeshed in Japanese culture ever since. Well,
what is the, you write about a time when Japanese people were not accepted in America. That's 100
changed.
Years ago. What's it like today for a Japanese person? We think, they fit in well. Do they feel that they are accepted?
I think so, yes. But in the my mentor, a professor who invited me to Japan, told me how glad she was that I was writing this book, because she had felt outside when she taught here in the 60s. She felt a little bit of discrimination. I don't think that happens now.
Well, I'd love to talk about this book some more, and thank you for writing it and for keeping us in touch through your fiction with the outside world. You're a great service. Wonderful book, Butterfly's Child, by our guest Angela Davis-Garner, and I loved it. I think you'll enjoy it as well. A wonderful story following up Puccini's opera Madame Butterfly. Thanks to all of you all. Thanks first to Angela Davis-Garner for being our guest, and thanks to all y'all for joining us. And I hope you'll come back here, same time, same place, next week, and I'll introduce you to another one of North Carolina's wonderful authors. See you then.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.